to correct others. The first, where I would say we're going to divide our discussion today into three sections. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at the mitzvah in the Torah of giving rebuke. We're going to look at the mitzvah as it appears in the Torah, and there's a very famous comment of the Ramban, and we will learn the Ramban on the mitzvah of giving rebuke. That's number one. After we've discussed the basis of how to speak to people, we're going to look at a fascinating story in the Gemara in Bava Metzia, and there's a wonderful machloket about, now this is not so much about whether we correct others, but do we have a responsibility? If I see a Jew doing something wrong, do I have a responsibility to report that person to the authorities? And it's a very, very interesting argument about whether we do or whether we don't. If I see a Jew doing something wrong, what's my responsibility? That's the second section. And then the third section is Halacha. We're going to see different opinions in Halacha, and I hope we'll even come down to some clear halachic guidelines at the end on how we're supposed to deal with a Jew who does something wrong, like in terms of my responsibility to society. Do I need to say something about it? Is that clear? Okay, those are the three sections. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'chaim. Ah, okay. It's really delicious. It's warm as well. Thank you. Okay. Is everything okay? We're doing okay?
Just needed to move it a little bit more.
Oh, wow.
So
The mom is so professional.
Exposure.
So professional. Okay. This is the verse. This is the verse. The verse says like this. The verses are from the book of Vayikra, from Parashat Kedoshim. And there's three psukim, and they are connected, as we'll see in the Ramban. The first one says, Lo telech rachil ba'amecha. Rechilut. Do you know what rechilut is? Rechilut is such a not nice thing. It's like just like being a busybody. Like telling tales about other people, like Lashon Hara. Lo telech rachil ba'amecha. Lo ta'amod al damreyecha. You shouldn't stand by when someone else needs your help. Don't stand on the blood of your friend. Ani Hashem. Okay. We're going to put that to one side. Now we get to Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Hocheach tochiach et amitecha. You are commanded to rebuke him. Velo tisa alav chet. And then you won't carry his sin. And then the next verse, Lo tikon velo titor. You shouldn't bear a grudge or take revenge against Ed B'nei Amecha, with another Jew. And then the end of this sort of discussion, Va'ahavta l'recha kamocha, that famous verse, love your neighbor as yourself, Va'ahavta l'recha kamocha, Ani Hashem. Three psukim. Now there are two ways to understand these three psukim. There's both of them are presented in the Ramban Nachmanides. I imagine the first one is sort of more standard understanding, and then the Ramban has a different way of understanding these verses. So let's look at the Ramban in source number 2. Lo tizna et achicha bilvavecha, bavur shederech hasonim lechasot et sinatam bilibam. That when you hate somebody else, it's really a terrible thing. When people hate each other, they cover it, they don't say it. Kmo she'amar bisvatav yinaker soneh, hizkira katuv b'hoveh. Sometimes people they feel they have some animosity towards somebody else, but they don't say anything about it. I don't want to say terrible things, but I think people from England are just amazing at that. Even in Croydon, that they are people that I don't want to say terrible things, but we all know people who you're not sure if they're being genuine this minute. So that's lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. And then the Torah continues, Va'amar, hocheach tochiach et amitecha. You need to rebuke them. Mitzvah acheret, that's something else. Lelamdot tochochat musar. You have to tell them to stop. Velo tisa alav chet. Because if you don't tell them to stop, they'll continue it, and it's a little bit your responsibility Shia lecha asham kasher yichata velo hochachta oto. That you saw that he sinned and you didn't do anything about it, you're going to carry a little bit of that sin because you have the possibility to fix it and you didn't fix it. You hear that? Does that make sense to you? Okay. That's that. Well, the truth is, something like this happened to me when I was a little boy. When I was a little boy, I lived in a community where there was no Eruv. There was no Eruv in the neighborhood in which I lived, and I used to walk home from shul regularly with somebody who would always carry their talit bag. You can't carry a talit bag on the way from shul if there's no Eruv. But I was a little boy, so I was too embarrassed to say anything to him. Anyway, at some stage he learned that you can't carry a talit bag, and then he came over to me and said, "Why didn't you tell me? You know, like you knew." Like it's so. Loti salav chait is if you see someone doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and if you speak to them, they might stop doing that thing. You are obliged to tell them about it. You hear that? Very, very interesting idea. Don't as a result of your silence, you'll cause yourself to transgress. You'll get punished for his sin because you could have prevented his sin and you didn't. Do you see that? Okay, that's the first interpretation, and I think that's probably the simpler way to understand it. Lotisa lav chet means if somebody does something bad, so we're all responsible for one another. So if I see another Jew breaking Shabbat, you have to tell them because otherwise, I'm a little bit part of their sin. You hear that? Okay, I've got two things to add to that. The first thing I'll add is Rabbi Sachs. I'm sure we mentioned this in the past, but I'll mention it again. Rabbi Sachs has a beautiful view, I think, of mitzvot. Rabbi Sachs spoke about in Western society, we live in a society of rights. So when I walk out onto the street, so I'm an upright citizen if I do not infringe on anybody else's rights. So if I get to a junction and there's a red light and I stop, so that's great. That's what you should be doing because if I were to walk, I would not be allowing it's green for them. I wouldn't be allowing them to travel. You follow? But as long as I am walking about doing my business and not infringing on anybody else's rights, I am an upright individual. In Jewish Halacha, Jewish society, that's not the case. An upright individual is not just somebody who doesn't break any rules, but he's somebody who's actively good. And this is a good example of that. That if I see somebody doing something, I could speak to them about it, so I have a responsibility to do so. You hear that? And if I don't, then I carry their sin. Now, we're not going to talk about this at length now, but you all understand that this sort of thing is done with great discretion and great dignity. You know, you're never allowed to embarrass anybody else. And you would only mention something to somebody if you think they would listen to you. But if you just, antagonize somebody by mentioning it to them, so then I'm not sure that would be a helpful thing to do. You follow? Our goal is always lahagdil Torah or lahatira, to make Torah more glorious. So sometimes if there's somebody who's fully aware that, I don't know, they didn't make a blessing on something or they're not allowed to do something, so then when you nudge them, you just cause them to, resent people who are telling them what to do. So you have to use great wisdom in knowing who to speak to and how to speak to them. And if ever you do speak to somebody, it has to be with great honor, because that's the way we interact with one another. Okay, that's opinion number one, first opinion. The Ramban himself learns these verses differently in an absolutely brilliant way. Listen to what he says. I think, says the Ramban, ki hocheach tochiach, rebuking, similar to the way that Avraham spoke to Avimelech, vayomer hakatuv, al tisna et achicha bilvavecha, ba'asoto lecha shelo kirtzonecha, aval tochichenu madua kacha asita amiti, velo tisa alav chet lechasot sinato b'libecha, ולא תגיד לו, כי בהוכיחך אותו יתנצל לך, או ישוב ויוודא על חטאו ותכפר לו. According to the Ramban, he's talking about something else. Why do I need to rebuke somebody else? Not because if I don't rebuke them, they're going to end up sinning, and then I'm going to, part of their sin is on me. No, it's very unhealthy to carry around resentment in you. Lo tisa alav chet, do not carry his sin, is not talking about the sin that he committed, but don't make you into this bitter, resentful person, despising despising whoever it is. That's your sin. Your sin is the sin of hatred of another person. You follow? So you have to tell them, because it's not healthy to think something and not say it. You follow what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you? Do you know people like that? How you do? Oh, fine, lovely to see you. Oh, do you know people like that? Do you know what I mean by that? Oh, it's terrible. When somebody says, how lovely to see you, when they're not at all happy to see you. Do you know have you ever experienced that? Anyway, that is Loti Salav Chet. That's a very unhealthy place to be, because it is, you're carrying this weight in you. Just say it, just spit it out, and say what you feel. It's always healthy to talk. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so that's his understanding. He says like this, that if we have a healthy society in which hocheach tochiach, speak to each other, loti salav chet, and then there won't be any grudges. Everyone's like open, everyone says what they think. And that's a much healthier society. And then when you create that healthy society, the result of that is the final verse, which is ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So according to the Ramban, he's not talking about individual mitzvot, rather he's talking about a process. Hocheach tochiach, you have to speak to people. Don't carry a grudge. And then if you speak to people and don't carry a grudge, the result is that relationship, which is now a healthy one, will develop into ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You hear that? Everything clear to everybody? Now I want to add one more thing to the Ramban. I have to say, I don't know whether, I know, I'll say this is true. When I was a little boy, sometimes I used to wonder the allure of Lashon Hara. What's so exciting about speaking Lashon Hara? Let's say, I don't know, you walk past a restaurant and the smell is just amazing, and somebody can't hold themselves back and they eat some. I mean, it would be a terrible thing, and I'm not sure anybody who would do it, but I could understand that sometimes my lust overtakes my rational thought, and every once in a while people make mistakes. Is that clear to everyone? But what's the Yetzer Hara for Lashon Hara? Why is it fun to tell you about him? Like, why is that a fun activity? So in psychology, there's a concept, and this is really, these verses are trying to address that. There is a concept of triangulation. Have you ever heard of triangulation? Triangulation works like this. Let's say, God forbid, the room is just full of tzaddikim, so I can't even use any of you as, but let's say there's a guy called Reuven, right? And Reuven has got a bit of a problem with Shimon. So what's the solution? Reuven says to Shimon, you're a little bit annoying the way you do A or B, right? That's because he's carrying this resentment towards Shimon. But sometimes what Reuven does, instead of speaking to Shimon, he'll speak to Levi and say, Shimon, he drives me mad. And then they'll have a good laugh about it. And then Reuven will feel better because he would have relieved a little bit of that tension. Levi will feel good because, he's had fun time with Reuven. Shimon feels good because, no one's spoken to him and he's just continuing his life. But the problem hasn't been solved, you follow? But it's like a triangle. And then, unfortunately, over time, when you don't treat it, so this gets worse, that gets worse, and then eventually it all explodes. You follow? So therefore, what the Ramban is saying is, Lo tisa lav chet, meaning, kick this guy out. Hocheach tochiach. You have to speak to each other. Hocheach tochiach. V'lo tisa la'achei. This guy here, Reuven, shouldn't carry all that pain or that anger in him towards Shimon. Speak to Shimon, and through that dissipate some of that anger, and the result will be v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You hear that? Does that make sense to everybody? Joy, joy, joy. Good. I don't know how much to stick on this. I want to add one more point. Before I add the points, anyone got any comments or questions on what we said so far? Any he'arot?
Yeah, I mean, it looks perfect on the paper, but in reality, a lot of the times when you say that you have a certain problem with someone, to this person, it can lead to like a hidden resentment towards the person that said that, and on the surface everything is fine, but the person who was told that is annoying or anything like this can be like a little bit backing from
Sure.
from the person. So on the paper perfect, in reality it can sometimes lead to,
you are so right.
so I don't know how to approach this.
Yeah, you're quite right. It's a real problem. Meaning, we're sitting here in a room of tzaddikim, and you guys don't even know what we're talking about. Resentment. What is that? Like not getting on with someone. These are words that you've heard of, maybe in the street, but you have no idea what we're talking about. So it's on paper it's perfect, but you're right that for people outside of this room, how do they actually implement it? That's a very good question. Were you going to add something, Mayor? Hopefully, Mayor was going to answer the question. That would be the ideal way that this should work.
I don't have a good answer for that, but I believe that at the end of the day, it depends who we deal with and how we deal with. And not necessarily everybody, who are in encounter in life, can stand that. Like it's like addressing the issue directly. Sometimes people just can't stand it.
Right.
For numerous reasons. So like that. But anyways, at least I believe the benefit of direct conversation is just to take off this burden of the shoulders. But at least this is the program minimum.
Right. Right.
But if it's going to help somehow and fix the relation, usually it won't. As my dad used to say, none of good deeds are remain unpunished.
Yeah, right.
So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So, but it's really
no, you're quite right that it's very difficult to implement. I want to add a tip. No, I wouldn't say it's a tip. It's an idea. Okay, it's like this. If you look in the book of Bamidbar, the book in front, right at the beginning of Bamidbar, Parashat Nassau, there is a list of different people that have to bring a korban chatat. Korban chatat is brought for lots of different types of people. If an individual sins, if the community sins, if a Cohn sins, and the Torah says on each of them, if this person sins, then he has to bring korban. If this person sins, then it's im Cohen, kol ha'am, if. But when it comes to the Nasi, when it comes to sort of the Nasi, who is the head of the community, the Torah doesn't say Nasi Yecheta, if the president, the head of the community, if the head of the community sins, it says Asher. Asher means when he will sin, meaning he's obviously going to sin. So Rashi, quoting the Midrash, says something very, very interesting on that word Asher. Every other time it was im, and now we have Asher Nasi Yecheta. Why Asher? So Rashi, quoting the Midrash, says, Ashrei Hador, praise be the generation in which a president, the head of the community, admits his mistakes. So the word Asher, when, is really short for the word Ashrei, praise. Like we say, Ashrei Yoshvei Vitecha. Praise be a generation in which the leader has the guts to say, I made a mistake. Praise be a generation. That is Rashi. Everything with me until now? On Rashi, there's a commentary. The commentary on Rashi was written by the Maharal in Prague. Oh, we just spent our lives in Europe here. The Maharal of Prague wrote a commentary on Rashi called Gur Aryeh. And what the Gur Aryeh asks a question. The Midrash says, praise be a generation in which the head of the community admits his mistake. Now, I would say, praise be the head of the community admits, praise be the generation in which the head of the community admits his mistake. Should be praised the guy. He's the one that admits his mistake. Everyone else was just like listening to him make the announcement. Praise be the people who listen to the announcement, or praise be the guy who had the guts to stand up in front of them and say, I made a mistake. You hear the question? Oh, so the Maharal's answer is an answer for you, maybe, Sebastian. And the answer is like this. He says, the Maharal, that in order for the head of the community to have the guts to stand up and say, I made a mistake, you need to have a community that is willing to listen to him. You follow? So it's praise be a generation in which people are able to say they made mistakes. Now, I think that's a very, very important guide. We know that there are people with different temperaments in our lives, right? So if by speaking it's just going to drive somebody mad, so first of all, a lot of that is to do with timing. There's certain people, when someone's tired, that's not a good time to speak to somebody. When they're, like when you know people, when is the right time to speak to somebody. But not only when, there's some people that it's just they're not up for it. And if they're not up for it, so then I'm afraid to say there's not a lot you can do. And we should all be blessed with the wisdom to figure out how to speak to whom. And when we make mistakes, each mistake that we make will be just like a learning curve for the next time we have to do this sort of thing. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So far we've been speaking about how we in the community speak to one another when we see somebody else doing something that has to be fixed. You follow? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. It reminds me of the security announcement in London Tube.
Oh, thank you.
You remember that?
No, what is it?
See it, say it, sort it.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, very good. My gosh, wow, you're a real bocky. That's recent.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to go like for a Mind the Gap or something.
Yeah, Mind the Gap's still there.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to change gears, but I think what we said until now will still be relevant. Until now we're talking about speaking to one another. Now we're talking about if I have a responsibility, if I see a Jew doing something wrong, do I have a responsibility to report that person to the authorities? But I hope through our discussion we will also sharpen a little bit to have a better idea of, who should we speak, should we not speak up? Like, what's our role in when we see bad things happening? What's our role in that story? So we're going to look at a fascinating piece of Gemara. This fascinating piece of Gemara is translated into English at the bottom of the page. Would anyone like to read the English? Oh, excellent. Yeah, great.
Okay. To a Met police officer, Rabbi Eliezer said to him, how can you detect the thieves? Perhaps you take the innocent and leave behind the guilty. The officer replied, and what shall I do? It is the king's command. Rabbi Eliezer then advised this policeman how to determine who was a thief and who was not. A report was heard in the royal court. They said, let the reader of the letter become the messenger. Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, was brought to the court and he proceeded to apprehend thieves. Rabbi Yehoshua, son of Karchach, sent the word to him. Vinegar, son of wine, meaning like inferior son of a superior father. How long will you deliver the people of our God for slaughter? Rabbi Eliezer sent the reply. I eradicate thorns from the vineyard. Rabbi Yehoshua responded, "Let the owner of the vineyard come and eradicate his thorns." A similar incident befell Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yossi. The prophet Elijah appeared to him and rebuked him. "What can I do? Is it the royal decree?" responded Rabbi Ishmael. Elijah retorted, "Your father fled to Asia. You flee to Laodicea. You should flee and not obey."
Excellent. There are two stories here. Notice, as is very, very common in Agadata, I mean, it's always in Agadata, it's not a halachic ruling, it is an excellent debate. There is a debate between Rav Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. The Rabbi Shimon here is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is a son called Elazar. And Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, worked as a policeman spotting Jewish thieves and passing those Jewish thieves onto the local authorities. Now, he was able to figure out who was doing terrible things. And when he was approached, it's so difficult. When he was approached by Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha, who said, "What are you doing?" So Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon said, we have the Jewish people is this beautiful garden, beautiful vineyard, and the weeds are destroying the vineyard. I'm just going into the vineyard and pulling out the weeds. To which Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha said, "Let the owner of the vineyard," meaning you are a vine, "let the owner of the vineyard do his gardening." But do you hear the question here? Like, is it my responsibility? If I see something wrong, is it my responsibility to pull the weeds out of the vineyard? Or do we say, no, if there are weeds in the vineyard, then it's up to God to pull the weeds out of the vineyard? You hear the question, everybody?
Question
Martin.
of responsibilities.
Huh?
Question of responsibility, whether you should react or shouldn't react.
Yes, exactly. Like, what's my responsibility when I see people doing something wrong? You know what? We are all part of one nation. Like, what should I be doing anything about that? Like, in terms of our achdut, in terms of, it might fall on me. Anyone have any thoughts on this dilemma? How would you resolve it?
It's difficult.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
It's difficult. Obvious statement, but relying on our morality and applying it to other people can be a really bad thing, because some people can go astray from the right path, and then we are facing the problem of people who are doing whatever they want because they feel they can do it because there is no punishment, at least
Right.
in their eyes. And this leads to even more and more, let's say, crimes or anything else that we are discussing here. And that's a problem. So we need someone to regulate whether something is allowed or not. So in this case, I would be maybe not necessarily a person looking, like trying to find someone in guilt, but in just if something will happen and we are sure that we need to do something, then there should be an authority that can do something with this.
Right.
But this case is kind of different because it states, like, maybe that's the wording here that leads me to think that he was looking for these people, like walking around the streets and looking for them. If not,
yeah, he was.
if he was,
He was patrolling. He was
I
patrolling.
right in my thinking, then I think it's a little over the top.
Although he's getting rid of the thorns in the vineyard, the thorns are destroying the vineyard. Like, if you have too many thorns in the vineyard will get destroyed.
Yeah.
Thank you. But you seem to be more on Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha. That is to say, I'm not going to sort of we need to protect people? It's a very complicated question.
It's a very tricky question because
Yeah.
first of all, looking at this piece, when he was like first trying to catch the thief or whatever, and then he is about to accuse them, right? And so the question is like each society has to have on one hand ideally people who are proactive
Mm-hmm.
in terms of preventing or in terms of eradicating the crime, whatever.
Right.
On the other hand, we have all this legal system in the society for some reason. Because
Right.
otherwise,
Right.
nobody can act as like lone sheriff somewhere in the Wild West. You can catch, you can accuse, you can bring them to the court, whatever.
Right.
It should be working system, and
It has to be part of a system.
Yes, and should be some boundaries set.
Mm-hmm.
So till this boundary, for example, I can be proactive as a citizen and report crime which is unfolds in front of me.
Right. Right.
But the other thing is like, oh, I'm going to punish you, like in the name of this system. So it's
Rabbi Loza was a little bit like that because he became a policeman.
Right.
He became, and it wasn't that it wasn't by coincidence. Meaning he was patrolling the streets to try to lower the rate of crime, which is obviously a good thing to do. I think it's obviously, as we can see, we could debate this from today to tomorrow. The advantage of Agadita is that you can keep thinking about it, and there's no need to reach a halachic decision. Agadita, when we read a story like that, so Rabbi Loza Rabbi Shimon was a very legitimate position. He is getting rid of the thorns in the vineyard. Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha is also a very valid position. So it's not my responsibility to send Jews to non-Jewish authorities. Okay. After that, what I'd like to do is I want to look now at some halacha ma'aseh. What we're going to see when we look at halacha ma'aseh, I'm not an expert in Jewish history, but as you know, the Shulchan Aruch was written about 450 years ago. There was a huge change in the world with the French Revolution in Europe. Jews were not at all integrated into general society. They were, and so therefore, if the non-Jewish authorities would arrest a Jew, who knows what would happen to the Jew? They're very much persecuted. I never actually watched Fiddler on the Roof, but I know that it's a very upsetting, difficult film. So that was Jewish life. Do you mean like who in that situation? You wouldn't dream of sending somebody to the non-Jewish because you know what would happen to them. So the Shulchan Aruch, as we will discover, was living in the world in which Jews were living. They weren't integrated into general society, and then we will see as Jews became more and more integrated into general society, and there was more pikuach. Pikuach is it was more like supervision. You can't, the authorities can't just like go on the street and start arresting people. I mean, the truth is, we live in a crazy world today, and there probably are countries that if you're a Jew, you just get picked up and arrested and sent into prison. But it's so funny, I haven't thought about this since October the 7th. When in England there've been sort of lots of difficult like stories of how the police have dealt with these pro-Palestinian marches and whether Jews could go or not. But anyway, putting that to one side, but we still live in a world of law and order. I don't think we need to worry about individual cases. Nobody in a Western country would ever, God forbid, be sent to jail without a trial. But they have a very fair, transparent law system. So what we're going to see is we're going to see in the older, more the sources from 400 years ago are very different to the sources from 100 years ago, and they are even different to the sources from like 15 years ago in terms of whether we should report or not report. We're going to see at the beginning the prominent voice is that of Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha, who says, "How like you're vinegar, son of wine? You're not the person to be sending Jews to non-Jewish authorities." But as we go down, the voice of Rabbi Loza and Rabbi Shimon becomes the louder voice. And nowadays, I would say in modern Western societies, it's really the voice of Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon, the Jewish policeman, that is probably the prominent voice. But it's, for most of Jewish history, it's been the voice of Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha, and then recently in Jewish history, the voice of Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon has become louder. You hear what I'm saying? Let's read them inside and then we'll see what you think about it. So if you go to the first source on the second page, don't report to the authorities, Shulchan Aruch is very, very radical. Look at this. Asur limsor Yisrael biyad ovdei kochavim. We're not allowed to send Jews to the non-Jewish authorities. Ben begufo, ben b'mamono, not the person, not his money. Vafilu haya rasha val averot. Vafilu haya meitzar lo umitzaro. Even if he's, like a terrible person causing great pain, you're never allowed to pass on a Jew to non-Jewish authorities. So even if you have a Jew who's like causing chaos within the Jewish community, you still can't send him to the non-Jewish authorities. Now he says, the remark, he's a bit more precise. For dafka b'dvarim ba'alma, aval im misaro mutar lemosro. If the harei yechol lehargo b'din b'makom sheyesh chashash she'achzor v'yimserenu la'anasim. If this person himself is sort of a spy on behalf of the non-Jewish, he's working to undermine the Jewish community. If he himself is working to undermine the Jewish community, then obviously you can send him to the authorities in order to save the community. You follow? Okay. Now I want to go to the bit that's underlined at the bottom. This is really quite a radical thing to say. Anyone who hands over a Jew, hands over a Jew to the non-Jewish authorities, isn't that crazy? Now I don't know if you've ever learned Chelek. There's Perek Chelek, which talks, Kol Yisrael Yeshem Chelek Le'olam Haba. It's the last Perek in Masechet Sanhedrin. This is not mentioned in the list of people that don't have a place in the world to come. That is a very, very, very strong accusation. It's in the Shulchan Aruch. It's not like and it's not based, as you can tell, not based on the Gemara. As we saw in the Gemara in Bava Metzia, there is a big debate between Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon on the one hand and Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha on the other hand. But because of the society at that time where Jews were persecuted, to send a Jew to the non-Jewish authorities would be like sending him off to be killed. And therefore you would not be allowed to do that. Now, even more than that, the Shach, commenting on that, continues in the same idea. V'chol hamoser, anyone who sends over a Jew, yordim legehinom v'nidon redorei dorot v'gufan kaleh v'nishmatan kaleh. They get a terrible, terrible punishment. So it's really, really quite clear until about 300 years ago, even less, until like the mid-18th century, ein al ma ledaber. You never report Jews to non-Jewish authorities because you're putting the Jewish person's life in danger. But just note, everybody, that this is not the position in the Gemara. This is the position taken by the rabbinic authorities in light of the situation going on in the world. However, that situation changes and we begin to start hearing from Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon. Look at the Aruch HaShulchan. Oh, I translated it. See, it says over here, note. Would somebody who wants to read the note?
I can read.
Oh, thank you so much. Note is a translation of the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan is Rabbi Chiel Michal Epstein, and he lived just over 100 years ago in Europe. And he wrote at the same time as the Chofetz Chaim wrote the Mishnah Berurah. It's a Sefer Halacha on the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is a set table. It's a play on the name. Aruch HaShulchan, Shulchan Aruch, Aruch HaShulchan. Yes, go on.
As is widely known, in times of old in places far away, no person had any assurance in the safety of his life or money because of the pirates and bandits. Even if they took upon themselves the form of government, it is known that this is true nowadays in some places in Africa where the government itself is grounded in theft and robbery. One should remind people of the kingdoms in Europe, and particularly our ruler, the Tsar, and his predecessors, and the kings of England, who spread their influence over many lands in order that people should have confidence in the security of their body and money. The wealthy do not have to hide themselves so that others will not loot or kill them. On all of this, in the presence of the king, hinges the rules of informing Moser and slandering Malshin in the Talmud and later authorities. As I will explain in front, these rules apply only to one who informs on another to bandits and so endangers that person's money and life, as these bandits chase after the person's body and money, and thus one may use deadly force to save oneself.
Excellent. Do you see? The Aruch HaShulchan is dividing the world into different areas, but in those societies where there is the rule of law and there's transparency and people can see what's going on, there'd be no reason not to follow the position of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, and you would be allowed to hand people over. There was a question, I didn't put it on the sheet here, there was a question asked once to Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein died in 1986, and he lived in the Lower East Side in Manhattan in New York, so he was really the preeminent posek in North America. He lived at the same time as Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was here in Israel. So you sort of the customs of the Jews in Israel were very much were following the position of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and the Jews of America would follow the position of Rav Moshe Feinstein. So Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked about going to a prison. Are you allowed? What goes on in a prison? And he felt that prisons nowadays are. I mean, it's not comfortable to be in there, but it's not like being sent into a dungeon 500 years ago, where you don't know if they're ever going to come back again. They're supervised. There's visiting hours. If it's a place that's not safe, then of course you wouldn't be allowed to send a Jew to go to a prison. They wouldn't have them over. But nowadays prisons are regulated. They're safer than they were once. That when I send somebody to prison, that their visiting hours, you can, maintain contact with them, and Bezrat Hashem, they'll come out afterwards. And therefore, the reason to follow Rav Yoshua ben Karcha as opposed to Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon has gone away, and really the position of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon has become the more prominent voice of the two. Do you want to conclude this story from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach? You're very good at reading, Sebastian.
Rabbi, question.
Yes. Before. Yes.
No, I want to understand.
Sure.
In this passage, Shulchan Aruch says,
Yes.
In which case do you think you have to report? In people's case, for safety community, you can send the Jews to the authority. Is what did you say before?
Yes. No. So the Shulchan Aruch, Rav Yosef Karo says you're never allowed to send. You never send Jews to non-Jewish authorities. But the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserles, adds and says that if the person is putting Jewish lives in danger,
even semi-Jewish,
huh?
Even Jewish making them Jewish.
Yeah, exactly. If this Jewish person is putting Jewish lives in danger, then you'd be allowed to report this Jewish person to the authorities because his activities are endangering the Jewish community. But we've seen, as we'll see now, also with the Rosh Hashanah and Oibach, that that's the position. It's the position of Rav Elazar Rabbi Shimon is a much more extreme position. Rav Elazar Rabbi Shimon was a policeman, so if he saw a Jew stealing, he would catch them and prove that they're a robber and have that person sent to jail. You follow? Even if they pose no threat to the Jewish community, because he was cleaning the thorns from out of the vineyard. Does that make sense to you? Do you want to read this last piece?
This one.
Yeah.
I asked Rabbi Auerbach about a particular Jew who stole a large sum of money and he was caught by the police in America. He was sentenced to a number of years in prison in America. Was it proper to assist in the collection of money for him? We were speaking about a large sum of $200,000 in order to fulfill the mitzvah of redeeming captives to have him released from prison. When Rabbi Auerbach heard this, he stated, "Redeeming captives? What is the mitzvah of redeeming captives here? The mitzvah of redeeming captives is only when the Gentiles are grabbing Jews, irration,
Irrationally.
thank you, for no longer reason, and placing them in prison. According to what I, Rabbi Auerbach, know, in America they do not irrationally grab Jews in order to squeeze money from them. The Torah says, "Do not steal," and he stole money. On the contrary, it is good that he serve a prison sentence so that he learns not to steal.
Excellent. So that's very, very, very much Rav Elazar Rabbi Shimon. So we've gone full circle. We started with Rav Elazar Rabbi Shimon, and then Rabbi Yeshua ben Korach said, "Wait, what are you doing here?" And then the voice of Rabbi Yeshua ben Korach became the prominent voice, as we saw in the Shulchan Aruch and in the Shach. And then in recent generations, where the world, I think, has become a safer place, certainly a bit more regulated, a bit more transparent place, it is less of a risk to pass on these Jews to the authorities. I think nowadays it's probably even more important. Like, we live in this global community. I know when I was a kid, there was a terrible, terrible story, and no one knew what to do with this story. I mean, eventually they did know what to do, but there were Jews who were smuggling diamonds in tefillin cases. Do you hear about this? They were like flying around the world, and there were diamonds in these tefillin cases. And then when they got to the airport, they would tell the airport security people that this is a religious item, and therefore they wouldn't search it. And then they would get their diamonds, from one place to another, smuggling diamonds through tefillin. Now, the result of that, eventually, when they were caught, was that it was much harder for anybody to bring their tefillin on an airplane. And if ever you brought your tefillin, they were checked very carefully because of of what they did. So even, and I mention this because even if I'm more of a Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha person rather than a Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon person, meaning I don't think you should report people, even if you say I don't think you should report, sometimes you do need to report because of the ramifications it will have on the wider Jewish community. That when we, when one Jew behaves in a bad way, so then it makes the whole Jewish community. Sometimes the way that people deal with the whole Jewish community is changed, and everybody suffers as a result of that. It's almost like a backhanded compliment because they see the unity in the Jewish people. So if there's one Jew that behaves in a particular way, and it's wrong, so they will assume that other people behave in that way too, and you really have to get rid of that, make sure it doesn't happen. Okay, I want to summarize just very briefly. We started by looking at psukim. We weren't talking at all about reporting to authorities. We were talking exclusively within our community. If I want to speak to somebody and tell them that something isn't going great. So we spoke about how to speak to people. We spoke about not bearing a grudge, about how not keeping things inside, and not discussing them. Talking to another person is always the most effective way to fix things if things need fixing. But then we also added, and that was like Sebastian's $1 million question, and who do we speak to and who do we not speak to? And of course there's no answer to that. You just have to know there's some people that will listen if we speak to them, and other people that won't listen, and they will. It may lead them to have a negative relationship. It could damage things. Could lead to antagonism. I suppose the golden rule is, our goal is the Hagdil Torah or Lahadira. We want to make the Torah glorious. So everything that I do that I feel would lead to Hagdil Torah or Lahadira, so then I know that's the right thing to do. But then sometimes speaking to a particular person will just cause chaos, and therefore you have to pick your battles, if that's the word. Is that clear to everybody? We looked at that Asher Nasi Chatan, about creating an environment in which people can speak honestly. Joy, that's number one. Then the second thing we did was we looked at this fascinating argument that you can continue thinking about all night tonight, about Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha versus Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon. What do I do? So, as you mentioned, Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon was a policeman. He was policing. He was going on patrol, looking for bandits, looking to arrest people. So that was one extreme, and then Rabbi Yeshua ben, what was his name? Rabbi number 2, when he came along, so then he got Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. When Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha came along, vinegar, son of wine. That discussion, it's not. There's no resolution to that. Both sides are right, and we don't know where to go. So after that debate between Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha versus Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon, we then looked at Halacha L'Maaseh, and we saw that originally Halacha L'Maaseh was very, very strict because of the environment in which people lived. No one would hand over a Jew to non-Jewish authorities. But as we move closer to today, where we live in a more regulated, more transparent, more like a safer world, a safer judicial world than they lived in 400 years ago. Nowadays, it's pretty much a standard that we do hand over people. If somebody did something that's wrong, so then they have to be punished for that which they did wrong. And it saves the whole Jewish community as a result. I remember as a child seeing it with this tefillin, with people smuggling tefillin, that the whole community suffered as a result of this activity that this one particular person was doing, and therefore it is important to stamp it out in order that we should all have our rightful place in the society. Yishar koach to everybody. Have a wonderful day. We'll turn this off. Oh, if